Today we're going to talk a little bit, and I'm going to demonstrate a prismatic progression. I want you to see an example of it first, and then you're going to see me complicate it within a small area. And basically I'm talking about working with a bath of color and making a slight shift. But first let me explain exactly how this game works, because painters tend to want content to do the work for them, the narrative of what they're painting. And I think that painting is really much more of an art form on its own rather than trying to tell a story that content would do. Writers and musicians tend to have a sequential story. We're trying to figure out a way to create eye movement. So this is one of the games I'll play to make eye movement. Now I'm going to turn my back and I want you to follow me. Initially, I was interested in the relationship between orange and violet. I think that's a really pretty relationship. And so I started with an orange shape, and then I started to let my trip around the color wheel help me. So I'm going to go, the length that's missing between orange and violet is red. So I'm going to shift from orange to red, and then I'm going to go from red to violet, violet to blue, blue to green, green back to blue, blue towards violet again, back to blue, back to green, back to a warmer green, back to a warmer green, finally to a lemon green, then from a lemon to a school bus yellow, and then from a school bus yellow to a slight orangey tone, and then back into orange again. I'll make this shift around the palette. This is a version of a prismatic progression. Most of my paintings have just a small shift from, say, a redded blue to a green blue, or from a redded light blue to a green mid-tone blue. So I'm shifting both value and color in an incremental way. Today I'm just going to demonstrate a small little shift inside this yellow so you can see how this works practically in a painted form. What we're doing is we're going to start with our weakest color, which is that lemon yellow. And I'm going to take that lemon yellow and find a spot for it, and I'm going to move toward the green. I'll take that weakest yellow and then move toward the orange. So the weakest yellow is going to be this lemon yellow. And I'll just start with it because it is so easily overpowered. And I'll try to use as little medium as possible with it. There's a dilemma here because yellows dry very slowly, and without medium, they dry very slowly. So I'm going to have to find a way to get just the right amount of medium to let the paint spread, but not so much as to dilute the color. So it's really a Goldilocks point. To that end, I start by getting my bristles wet and then running them through the color. And I get a kind of and I'll just take the tip of the brush and I'll find that point, that pivot point that's not orange and is yellow, and I'll find that right about here. So this is where my yellows are going to shift either toward the green or toward the red. And I'm just going to slowly use one of these beautiful brushes. This is a Jack Richardson wash brush. And they're very difficult to find here in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I buy them by bulk so we can sell them here. But they're really wonderful because if you treat them properly, and we'll go through that in another video, you can have a very thin spatula tip. It doesn't have so much bristle that it holds a lot of paint, and it really lets me work with the edge of the brush. So I'm going to scoop the paint up, flip the paint over, and I'm going to make strokes that are the relative size of the grasses in this distance. So I'm going to start to find this band of color, and I'm going to broaden it out a little bit. And to that same bath of color, I'm going to slightly add a little bit more of a green or a blue. So this is that Utrecht permanent green light. I'm going to add the tiniest bit to that entire bath, just enough to give that whole bath a little bit of a shift. I'm going to again get the bristles a little wet, scoop up that paint, and I'm going to shift it just slightly in this direction. So it's a tiny bit greener, and I'm leaving some of the underpainting showing. And in order to make that shift appropriately, I'm going to add to that a little bit more of a transparent yellow, just that dirty yellow. Remember I talked earlier in another video about letting dirty color help you with that transition. So when I'm getting into the proper value, I can take some still to green or some dirty yellow and mix it into that entire bath and help me gradually shift without being so obvious about finding bands of color. We want to see a natural sort of shift in the color. And as that comes this way, I'm going to add a little bit more green to that bath of color. Just 1 or 2 strokes. Look how that just slips again. And then I'm going to let it get a little greener. And I'm going to warm up that yellow a little bit. Come back again. Look how that's just a gradual shift. And I try not to make it like a perfect band. Occasionally I come back and throw a little bit of color higher or lower just because that's the way you'll see it. And as I get closer to the viewer, it's going to get, has a lot of blue, it's going to get cooler and cooler. So I'm going to shift and make this tone here. You notice my strokes are getting a little longer and they're getting a little cooler as they come in this direction. I don't need to do much down here, so I'm just going to sort of wipe the brush and clean it up here. Then I'm going to take this rubber tip tool and I'm going to lightly, this is a neat tool, I think they call it a color shaper. And what I'm going to do is use the tip of this. I use the gray version. It comes in white and gray and maybe black. And this is a firm version. And what I'm going to do is just help me break up in a visual way, in a vertical pattern. It's going to help me break up some of that banding and reveal some of the color that was underneath. And one of the things that painters tend to not do is recognize that subtraction is every bit as valid as addition. We're just trying to create a color in a spot. So if I can reveal that color or I can add that color, our brain doesn't know much difference. So we're going to try to have this combination of the tone that comes this way. And now you're going to see me shift that back into the oranges. So I'm going to clean this palette up. I've cleaned up my palette and gotten rid of all the green. I'm going to start back with that same lemon yellow. But this time I'm going to add a tiny bit of the cad yellow medium to it. I'm going to switch brushes because there's still an awful lot of green on this brush. And I can wipe it off. Maybe I'll try that. Let's try that first. So what I'll do is I'll take the brush, get it back in the medium, pull and point that brush. So I've got that, retain that spatula tip. And then I'm going to take that paint again, run it through this yellow, and I'm going to start going toward the oranges. So normally I like to go in this direction because I'm able to lay one color on top of the other. In this case, I'm going to put in like an underpainting that lets us see that yellow underneath, and then I'm going to start to add a little bit of this orange into those yellow tones. And as I come back across, I'm going to build in this direction. And I have a really nice coat of paint underneath there, so I don't have to do a whole lot on this final layer. Just graduating this color toward the reds. So I'll take this bath of color here, and as I get closer and closer to the red and the right value, start to play with that in. And it's interesting, I don't know if you can see this, but the green that's underneath there is the same value that the red I'm putting on top is. So it adds for a layer of kind of interesting vibration in your eye. So you're able to see a color shift without being able to see an edge like you do here. So the color just shifts incrementally without seeing an edge. And so occasionally I like to see an edge because it helps give us a point to look at and identify this as grass rather than just a wall or something else. And other times I just want to see the color shift. And so I'm pretty successful with that shift. I think this stands out a little too much, so I'll come back and touch that. And that tiny little touch to help pull that away. And this is, notice how this is a real light little, like a hit on the surface of the canvas. So I'm not covering up the paint completely. I'm just dragging it through the wet paint that's underneath it. And I'm trying to create this gradation of color without seeing a single edge. And then in order to help with that, I tend, instead of trying to see this as a series of horizontal bands, I'm going to come back now and change color a little bit and help me see a rise to the land. So in this case, I'm going to slightly come up and see the land coming up. And in this case, I'll shift back to some of the greens and let this have a slightly different angle to it. So we're able to see like where one that places this plane behind that plane a little bit. Across, and then the same thing with the reds. And I'll work this back and forth until I have all the information that I need. And then I clean up my palette. Usually, and this is the one thing that we forget to do, As we walk and step back from the canvas, we're able to see it from a viewing distance instead of the painting distance. This is a prismatic progression. So without too many edges, I'm going from a very cool green through that yellow all the way to red. That's 180 degrees around the color wheel without an edge.